Hi guys! Now that we've covered how to make an Ableton Live template so that you can easily create mashups, it's time to load in some tracks and get creative. If you've been reading along with the How to Make Great Music Mashups book, then you'll already know how to identify great pairings based on similar tempos, feels, keys, and rhythms. After all, the most important thing about mashups is picking the right elements to go together so that you don't actually have to do that much work to make them fit. Making sure you put the right pieces in the right places is even more important than the techniques used to blend them together. If you're still not sure about this part yet, you can simply try experimenting. You might actually discover a great moment just by accident. Follow the steps in video 1.3 on warping to make sure both elements are in time and in key. For the sake of this tutorial, let me grab a couple of tracks, help Ableton find the start point and tempos, and make sure that they're key matched. The main track I'm bringing in is in B minor, and the break track I'm bringing in is in A minor. First, I'm muting the second track so that I can just listen to the main track on its own. I'm just double checking the start point and the first warp marker to make sure that Ableton's got it right. I'm just going to make a small adjustment, following the steps that we've seen so far. Since it's a main track, I'm setting it to beats mode at 1/4 interval. That means that once every beat, Live's going to do a quick crossfade and make sure that the track catches up to the correct spot. That should be hidden nicely behind our kick drum. I'm going to go through the same process on the break track. I've noticed that my session tempo isn't the same as my main track, so in order to try and protect the integrity of the main track, I'm going to set the session tempo to be the same speed. Hopefully this means the main track won't even have to warp at all. I'm just having a quick listen through to make sure everything still sounds fine. And I'm also looking out for the points where the main drops begin, as well as where the breaks begin, so that I can set splice points in the song. You can create a splice in a clip by clicking on the appropriate point and using the keyboard shortcut Ctrl-E for Windows or Command-E for Mac. If you can separate your intro, your breakdowns, your drop sections and your outros, it'll be easy to drag them around and come up with a basic arrangement. That point was the main kick-in, so I'll definitely be putting a splice there. Now that I think I've got the main track's break figured out, I've muted it. I'm going to repeat the same process with the break track now. I found the start of the break. If there was some way to pass all this fire to you, I'm making sure it's on Complex Pro mode so that the breakdown elements are as protected as possible. It's just another way for you to take it out. And I'm going to see how the transposing goes. It's just another way for you to take it out. It's just another chance for you to make it out. If this is the end, we're gonna take this world. Even though the break track has been put in Complex Pro mode, at this point, I'm starting to think that the vocal hasn't quite survived that 2 semitone shift. It's just another way for you to take it out. So for the break track to move 2 semitones up from A to B was a bit too much, so I've decided to pull it back by 1 semitone to A sharp. And to come and meet it at A sharp, I'm going to see if I can move the main track down a semitone from B to A sharp without destroying the audio quality. It survived the transposition okay, but I can hear that the rhythm is starting to get pushed around a little bit in between each beats point. So I'm going to set the beats interval to be 1/8 instead of 1/4. That way, it'll be catching up to the tempo of the session twice as often. Sometimes that means live has to do a crossfade right in the middle of a kick drum, so it can be pretty devastating. I'll just have to have a quick listen and make sure that there's nothing noticeable. That rhythm sounds much better to me, so I'm happy to go with that. Now I can get back to finding the important points in the break. That's the end of the build-up, where I'm hoping that I'll be able to go back into the main track. I'll put a splice point there and mute everything outside the breakdown. Now that I've removed the break from the main track, and I've removed everything except the break for the breakdown track, I've got all the pieces of the puzzle I want to make my mashup. Getting them arranged is as simple as just moving the pieces around. When learning about rhythm, we discovered that it's incredibly important to preserve the rhythmic patterns within each piece by lining them up to coincide as much as possible. Line up your 8-bar sections as well as you can. It helps keep the illusion of the music alive and times events so that the listener hears them when they expect to. You should easily be able to switch from one to the other and continue to hear the same beat, bar, and bar groupings continue even while the music changes. I can unmute both tracks now and see how it's going to sound as it goes from one to the other. Okay, that's a pretty stark difference at the moment, but I can hear that it's in time and it's in key, so that's a good start. Same goes for the end. I'm starting to be able to imagine in my head now what it's going to sound like when it transitions from one to the other. But the good news is I'm happy with the way that the keys work together, the rhythm works together, and the energy of the two songs works together. Because I've taken so much care making sure that Live knows exactly where each song starts and what tempo it is, I can be confident moving clips around the grid and know that everything will stay in time. When combining a dance element with a non-dance element, such as pop or rock, you'll need to work extra hard because the non-dance track doesn't automatically follow the same 8-bar friendly format. This mashup arrangement was super easy because both the break track and the main track had the same arrangement style, going from intro to a drop to a break to another drop and then into the outro. Here's an illustration of 3 of the most common arrangement types in dance music. As you can see, they all begin with an intro and they all finish with an outro, but what happens in between differs a little. As attention spans continue to get shorter and shorter, the middle arrangement becomes more popular among dance music. Songs like this can sometimes only be 2 to 3 minutes long, whereas tracks that use the arrangement type at the bottom were far more common in the 90s and early 2000s, where a long track didn't necessarily scare off the dance floor. These kinds of tracks could be upwards of 7 minutes. As you can see, they always end with a fairly large final section. That way, they don't let the listener down, and the dance floor journey feels like it keeps progressing onwards as the DJ mixes into the next track. It's important to preserve this. After you have your basic arrangement set up, you can start unmuting sections where you want the tracks to transition into each other and start playing around with fading and high-pass filtering to get them to move from one to the other. If you're lucky, your 2 different elements will already share the same arrangement, in which case it's very easy to swap parts from one into the other, and the song will play itself out in the way that makes sense. Other times, the natural arrangement of the tracks will be different from each other, and you may need to cut some parts out or repeat others in order to make the mashup work. Check out the arrangement chapter in the How to Make Great Music Mashups book to learn more about arranging your mashups. Whilst a mashup can either begin by going from an intro straight into a break, or an intro straight into a drop section, you should always make sure that your mashup finishes with a drop before going into the outro. If you finish with a breakdown, it's going to make it sound like the music's heading somewhere big, but then it's going to let the audience down when it wanders off into the outro. the next video, I'll show you how to make a do-it-yourself a cappella. Thanks for watching.